How we doing, guys? I'm going to show you the greatest lift man ever devised, and that is the deadlift. So what you're going to need, a bar, Olympic bar here, a couple plates. Now the plate you're going to use is going to depend on how strong you are. The least amount you can do with a metal plate is going to be 135 pounds because that's the standard diameter. The standard diameter of a 45-pound plate is what you'll be deadlifting if you do go to a competition. If you can't deadlift 135 pounds, don't worry. Grab yourself a bumper plate here. This one's 25 pounds. So if you can deadlift 95 pounds, throw 25s on each side of the bar. If you can't deadlift 95 pounds, don't worry, we've got 10-pound plate here. Now this will get you 65 pounds on the bar. With a 45-pound bar and a 10-pound plate on each side, that's 65 pounds. So your setup. I teach the conventional deadlift. If you can do a conventional deadlift, you can do a sumo deadlift. Rage in the comments if you want. So to set up for a conventional deadlift, you're going to want your shins right along the smooth part of the knurling right here. Feet pointed forward. You're going to take an over-under hook grip. I like the hook grip because it's a more stable grip than the double over. This is all preference. Personally, I use the over-under hook grip. Now, the exercise begins with a neutral spine. The shoulder blades back. Deep breath in, and stand up. Hips through. And then as you go back down, we're sending our hips back first. We're slowly bending our knees. Light touch on the ground. Repeat as needed. Back down. All right, I'll show you guys a side view. So from the side, this is the money shot for a deadlift. Hips, knees, shoulder blades back. Lock the knees. Bring the hips through. Force the weight back. Light touch on the ground. Lock the knees. Bring the hips through. Something else that's very important is how we breathe in the deadlift. So we get into our proper position, hips, knees, shoulder blades back. Deep breath in. Stand up. Exhale as those hips come through. Again, deep breath in. Up. Hips through. It's very important that as you deadlift, take a deep breath in and you hold your breath. That breath is what helps you stabilize your spine. If you exhale, what's going to happen? If you're here, you're going to collapse if you exhale. So don't do that. Some pro tips for your deadlift. Now, in your starting position, the way you know you're in the proper position at the start is if you feel a little pull in the hamstrings. Not a big pull, a little stretch. That tells you that when you lift that bar off the ground, your hamstrings are going to be involved. The more your hamstrings are involved, the less your low back is going to be involved. And that's what we want. We want a balanced contraction. That's what makes the deadlift great. It builds balance. In order for that to happen, your deadlift has to be balanced. Also, I don't recommend lifting in shoes. Shoes pull you up off the ground. If you are going to lift in shoes, you should get some special deadlifting shoes or wrestling shoes, something without a lot between you and the ground. Because the higher you are off the ground, the higher distance you got to pull that bar. And even if it's only half an inch or an inch, that's a lot if you're trying to deadlift 400 pounds. Also, when you're trying to get into your starting position, what will happen, your body's going to need to accommodate that extra inch off the ground. Where you get that, it's based on your biomechanics. Sometime, if you've got that extra inch, your body's going to need to get those hips further back, or it's going to need to bend the knees more, or it's going to need to round the low back. None of those things you want. See if I'm full of it or not. Deadlift in some shoes that you typically deadlift in, and then try deadlifting barefoot and see which one feels better. So some common mistakes and where to look to correct them. The worst, in my opinion, the worst deadlift mistake you can make is a rounded low back, either at the start, or even if you start with a neutral low back and then you round on the way up. That can be a really big problem because the lumbar spine is very strong, but it's strong in lordosis or neutral. It is not strong in flexion. The spine is not designed to be strong in flexion. So where you look to correct that, you're going to want to start with core stability. When people can't get into this nice tight position, it's usually their abdominal muscle is not firing correctly. So I recommend if you're struggling with that, go to my core stability playlist and work through those exercises, and I bet when you get through that, if you're struggling to maintain that neutral spine, you won't have that problem anymore. Another thing I see people do is they bend their knees too much. Now, the more you bend your knees, the weaker you get. Where's the hardest part of a squat? The hardest part of a squat's at the bottom. Because the more you bend those knees, The longer those muscles get, the harder time they're gonna have at getting back up. The strength of the deadlift, what makes it the biggest exercise, one that human beings can do the most with, is every muscle's in the optimal position. So the optimal position for the human body is down here in the athletic position with only slightly bent knees, at like a 1/8, maybe a 1/8 squat with the shoulder blades back. This primes everything. If you're finding that you can't maintain this position, or you really don't like that slightly bent position, you prefer more knees bent, greater knee bend, check your knee stability, check your hamstring strength, check your erector strength. Because if your low back is weak or your hamstrings are weak, your body is not going to want to be in that position with the hips back and the hamstrings tight. Those are clear. Check your ankles. That is it. That is the deadlift.